Welcome to another episode of How to Disaster. I'm really excited, as I always am, but especially today to talk to you about a very exciting subject, wood, because so many people believe that wood is not a material you should use after a megafire. But today we have on Tyler Freres, who is a vice president at a really cool family-owned company in Central Oregon in the Santiam Canyon. This company is over 100 years old, and so you would think that perhaps they would go the way of many timber companies, but instead they have innovated. And not only have they innovated, they've done it in a way that could keep us all safer. The technology is advanced, the innovations are hopeful, and the product is beautiful. There is a total misconception that you have to trade beauty for resiliency. And this podcast is going to show you so much and teach you so much about how you can actually have beauty, resiliency, and use the power and the beauty of wood and locally sourced to get us through this next phase. I hope you enjoy this time that we spent with Tyler. I think he is very smart and very innovative. And I think you will walk away from it with a different view of what it means to rebuild or build with wood products. Enjoy. Welcome to the How to Disaster podcast, Tyler Freres.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Good to be here.
I'm so happy to be here. And, I know I said this in the intro, but last week I had the honor and the privilege of being in Santiam Canyon, seeing really a disaster that's closing, but also being able to tour your really wonderful facility where you're creating one of the things that we're going to talk about today. But where I wanted to start with is sort of at the beginning. If you could share with us your origin story, because it's really interesting. Not all executives actually start sort of, doing the hardest jobs inside of their, even though it's a family business of 100 years, but I really want to hear about like what you learned and what that decision process looked like.
Sure. I think part of that comes just from the origin of being in a family business. I'm a third generation in the family business, and it was one of the virtues and values that my parents had, and especially my father, that we as children would work in the business as soon as we were legally able to do so. And so that meant sweeping floors to begin with. It meant working in the cat shop or mechanic shop. It meant a whole bunch of different odd jobs until I was able to get a little bit older. Then it was more manual labor, pulling on the green chain, the typical things that people think of when they think about wood products manufacturing, and just end up working in more and more complex jobs as I became a little bit older and could appreciate them a little bit more.
I feel like that would directly affect how the other employees felt about you or their level of respect for you, because if you work alongside in the hardest jobs, that means that you have like an egalitarian, approach to it. You have even more respect for the people doing those jobs. Did you find that to be true?
Yeah, I think especially with mill employees and with supervisors, that it definitely helps to convey and for them to understand that you have a expert grasp on the issues that they're trying to go through on a day-to-day basis. That the advice you give is not the advice you give is pertinent and is valuable, and that you've actually been through their experiences and can also understand why they have difficulty on a day-to-day basis. So I do think it helps from that standpoint. As far as when I was younger and working on the green chain with people, I'm not too sure. I'm sure I was still the boss's kid that that was probably slacking off at some period of time, because that's generally what's noticed more than the extra efforts.
Oh, right. Do you mind giving the audience just a brief overview of your family business? Because it's one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm talking about your company. There's something really endearing about how long you've been around, because to weather so many changes in this particular industry is not that usual, and still be here and have innovated. So can you talk about the brief history of your family business?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit on a very important point here, in that there's not that many family businesses left in the wood products industry. We've largely been squeezed out by the larger companies, and it has taken that innovation. And one of our taglines is that innovation is our tradition. And I would like to say that started from our grandfather way back in 1922 when he founded the business. Back then, it was the time in which the sawmill was put in the forest because they couldn't bring the forest to the sawmill. And so it was everything you could possibly imagine if you envision an old logging camp back in the early 1900s. We've been here for a long time. My family arrived in the Santiam Canyon 4 generations ago, so we've been here since the mid 1800s. So we've got our roots in this canyon, and really value the local people that have been here through a long period of time.
So you were born and raised in Santiam Canyon, and in Labor Day of 2020, like many parts of Oregon, you suffered a devastating megafire. That's how actually I came to know you about a year after that. And so what I would like people to hear is the type of community that is Santiam Canyon, and also talk about how that fire affected you personally and professionally.
Oh boy, that is a big question. So I think I felt at the time, much like most other people here, that while forest fires were around us, they didn't directly impact this far west into the Cascades. So to a certain extent, I think I was as surprised as everyone else that we were able to be so dramatically affected by particularly the Beachie Creek Fire when it came through. And it was an immediate, sudden, and emotional disaster, of course. If I was going to characterize the people in this canyon, I would say they are generational as well. For the most part, there's not. We do have some people that move into the area, but it's really a generational place where you grow up knowing a lot of the names of the people and where they lived and how they're connected, and their children and their children after that. So we knew specifically the people that were dramatically affected by the fire. And of course, even some of the people that perished in the fire, we know them as well. And so, of course, it's a heavy event when a wildfire comes through a community like ours.
And you did suffer the loss of a fishing cabin, but also the business suffered a loss too. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So specifically, our company manages about 18,000 acres, which is not a huge timber base for a company like ours. But when the fire came through, particularly the oldest properties that we had in the North Fork of the North Santiam River were specifically impacted. And so we lost about 5,800 acres in the fire of merchantable timber. And that was all age classes. So, trees that were 15 years old to trees that were 40 years old to trees that were, 60 or 80 years old as well. Which was devastating to see, these lands that I grew up in and drove through as a child and as a young man, suddenly turned to charcoal is what it looked like. To add a silver lining to that, however, we were able to get into those 5,800 acres and actually salvage almost 100% of our pre-fire inventory of timber. So people assume that the timber is unusable after wildfire. That can be further from the truth. It's actually all usable as long as you can be very responsive and very immediate. So we were able to immediately go in, salvage 100% of the volume that we had impacted by the fires, and then immediately replant about 3 million seedlings within the first 2 years after the fire. So we will have productive forests back on our lands much sooner than we will see on the surrounding public lands that are around us. I wish that our federal government and our state government could be as responsive as that, because I look out my window now and I see fields of Scotch broom where really trees and forests should be. And they have not hardly begun the restoration that should be occurring across the almost 300,000 acres that were impacted by these fires.
I was very much struck by the amount of Scotch broom there. Can you explain what Scotch broom is? Because it's a problem we have after fires too. And obviously I've been to many of the fires, most of the mega fires across the nation. I've actually never seen that much Scotch broom. While it's very kind of pretty because it's yellow, you can't think of it as pretty because it's dangerous. Can you talk about what that is for people who don't know?
Yeah, Scotch broom is an invasive species, and it's very aggressive, and it will take over a landscape, particularly after a wildfire. My understanding is that Scotch broom seeds are very persistent. So they will take root after a wildfire before any of the other local vegetation will typically take over. So on our private lands, we're able to immediately mitigate Scotch broom with herbicides and then replant, so we can make sure that the trees are free to grow, and that after that, the Scotch broom is not able to take root around it. That said, across most of our public landscape, there's restrictions on being able to mitigate these invasive species, and so they haven't been able to more effectively rehabilitate the lands that are around us.
And what's the percentage of land that is owned by the federal government in Oregon?
The federal government owns about 60% of our state, particularly the forest lands in Oregon. The state government owns about another 10 to 20%. The large private landowners have about 15 to 20% as well. And then the remaining is other small private land ownership. So really the vast majority of the land within Oregon is owned by either state or federal government, and the federal government being either the U.S. Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management.
I hope that one of the things that people learn from this podcast today is when you look around your community and you think, oh, why isn't somebody doing something, that actually from the federal government, we have a collective responsibility as Americans to come in and really start to mitigate these lands more aggressively. The federal government is the largest landowner in the state of California as well. They own about 48% of all of our land, and the state owns about 3%. And so people don't necessarily understand that they actually have to work together and sit at the same table. Otherwise, there's just disparate efforts that don't match at all. And we see that repeatedly in megafire areas. And so I think it's a really important point for people to understand the landscape of who owns what, which means that we all have to work together. And the other thing is that for people to understand that you do need to go in and clear a lot of the wood that was actually burned in the fire, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, on that specific point, the trees that have died that were impacted by the forest fires, we are now 6 years in. Those are now starting to break. They're starting to fall. And all you're looking at is dead woody debris across what used to be the forest floor. Well, that will be the kindling for the next forest fire. I mean, it is dry wood that is easily combustible. And the fact that we have not removed that material, I would say preferably in a way that can create revenue and jobs and prosperity in the rural community, as opposed to we have waited long enough now that it is essentially landfill material, or they have to find some cost or some way to get rid of that material that doesn't create a beneficial building product anymore. I think what the federal government particularly has suffered from is 30 years of environmental litigation, where we're not managing our forests by the latest available science anymore. It's essentially managing the forest according to judicial decree, essentially what lawsuits have been filed and what we can actually do in the forest, which has created essentially a morass or a log jam, where the federal government is so gun shy about going in and managing any of the resources, particularly for revenue, that they just think that a hands-on approach is okay. I think what these disasters show us is that it is much better for we as a society and we as a community to go in and actively manage these resources to make sure they're healthy, they have longevity, and they have resilience in the face of these natural disasters. I think that wildfires are one of those natural disasters in which we of course can't get rid of them. There will always be forest fires in some way, because you can't stop the fact that you have oxygen and ignition and fuel. However, we can create a much more resilient environment out there where the forest fires aren't so impactful upon these communities that live within them, that they don't travel so quickly, that you have not good fire breaks that keep fires contained, and there's not as much dead woody debris within our forests that can be the true combustion source. So we have a lot to do, and we have a real opportunity here to create the prosperity, but also create resilient forests.
I appreciate this conversation so much because often people think that that there are different people on, let's see, that it has to be a dichotomy, that it can't be that we all have the same outcomes in mind, which is protecting ourselves against megafires, not necessarily wildfires, because megafires are so much hotter that they leave the landscape just absolutely charred in a way that's not healthy. And we're also not used to looking at what a healthy forest looks like, which is something you and I spoke about, is that you should be able to run through a forest, with your arms wide open and not hit all of the brush and undergrowth and understory that is actually just fuel, and not the way that the land was managed for thousands of years before we started saying, no, you can't manage the land at all. You have to leave it alone. But human beings have been interacting with the forests for, a minimum of thousands and thousands of years. And so I hope that megafires, if they teach us nothing else, is that is something that we can attend to. I think we're doing better, at least in California, we're doing a little bit better. We have so much to do, though, so I totally agree, which is one of the reasons why I am very excited about mass ply panel, because I had heard of a mass timber, I had heard of cross-laminated timber, but you have something that is in that realm, but really exciting. So can you talk about that process of actually the shift that began before the fires, but innovating, especially in an industry that's, been around for so long, is not always the easiest thing to do. And it's very much responsible for, keeping part of your economy alive, but it's also good for the ecology. So can you talk about it? Because I find it very exciting.
Sure. So I think part of it goes back to our basic materials that we make. So we are a veneer producer, and most people don't separate veneer from lumber or other types of products. But what veneer is typically used for is it's used for plywood. So it's the thin layers of veneer that goes into a cross-laminated piece of plywood. It goes into hardwood panels as far as a blank for a hardwood face. It goes into laminated veneer lumber, so it's your typical use as a header for a door or a window, or an I-joist for your floor, an engineered I-joist instead of a standard 2x12. But through these innovations that we've created, we can make a mass timber panel out of our veneer-based product. So that means that we could take 4x8 sheets of veneer that are typically 1/8 of an inch thick, and laminate those together into a much larger element, let's say a maximum of 12 feet wide, 48 feet long, and up to 24 inches thick. So a very, very large format panel. And, we were able to get that patented in North America, so US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And it's a big lift for a small family company like ours. We don't have an R&D budget. We don't have, until we started developing this product, we didn't have a whole bunch of truly technical and certification or professional type of help in our organization to try and develop it. So it's been quite the journey for us.
Well, it's, the reason I was so excited is because any innovation that actually helps not only the local economy, but also the ecology, and helps people be more fire resistant is something that we get very excited about. People lose a lot of hope in this space. They're like, oh, it's just a disaster. We are hopeless. We can do nothing about it. But you can also do something about it, but in a way that can help your local economy and the ecology. I don't usually get that entire circular benefit, in this work, I was just so excited about it. But can you tell people what's it like? You can use smaller diameter trees, but a little bit more about the process of creating. And I was also fascinated by the glue factor too, which may not sound that exciting until you hear about it.
Yeah. So for that, I think that forest management is one of those things that just has nothing but wins. It has the opportunity to make our communities much more prosperous, our forests healthier, and our ecosystems safer as well. To your point, our particular process of peeling veneer, we can take in small diameter wood that most people would think is unusable understory or dead understory and create a very technical engineered product out of that. So the minimum diameter that we pull in is typically 3 inches, and we will do our own sorting so that we put those products in the right places. But essentially, we will peel a block that's as small as 5 inches into veneer and then dry that veneer and laminate it together into very engineered wood products that have very predictable performance. So for those people that are particularly concerned about the idea that there's no potential revenue that can come out of or to mitigate the cost of potential forest restoration, that is entirely not the case. There is a massive opportunity for us here to take those materials that most people think are unusable and unwanted and just a cost and turn it into a very valuable resource in our rural communities if we're allowed to.
One of the really exciting things, though, is the fire resistance. Okay, so can you talk about the fire resistant? Why is it fire resistant? Because people think, oh, it's wood. How could it possibly be in any way superior to building with concrete and steel? Tell us about that.
Sure. People have this perception that because steel and concrete are considered combustible from the start, that they perform well in fire. And, that's really the furthest from the truth, because steel actually gives up its structural capacity at a much lower temperature than wood does. And most concrete has steel included into it, so rebar and whatnot. And it can tend to spall when it goes under high temperature. So after any fire event, typically steel and concrete, they might not be usable. Wood, when you produce it in an extremely large format, is very, very predictable. The best way I've heard this described is if you're trying to build a campfire, you need to start with the little tiny pieces, shavings, moss, kindling, in order to get it going. And then you might be able to put a whole log, but you're not going to be able to start a fire on a whole log. The same is very, very true for our panels, that they are so large and so dense that if a fire is happening around it, that the char rate or the rate at which the fire can burn through the wood is very, very predictable. So that can be built into the engineering designs for the building. Typically, when we help an engineer design for our buildings, our panels have a lot of excess capacity and they're limited by vibration. And so from that standpoint, we can withstand a couple inches of char for a 2-hour fire rating and still have plenty of material there to maintain the structural capacities of a building. So from that standpoint, wood could be one of the safest materials we have to build with if it's done in a very large format in multi-story buildings.
Well, and so so this is interesting because you can use them in multi-story buildings but you can use them in residences, and not everybody is aware that you can do both. I've run into that when I've been talking about this for a couple of years. They think, no, it's only for large scale buildings. So first, let's talk about for large scale buildings, because we were able to go into one of yours that you had built out of the mass ply. Can you talk about like the timing of it is really interesting as well. How long did it take? How big is that building? And why is it so quiet inside and smells so good?
All those natural attributes of wood that we all appreciate. Well, so the interesting and unique thing about mass timber is that it's all prefabricated. So we will essentially take in a building design and we will translate every structural element into a wood product that can replace either a steel frame, steel roofing, whatever type of material you want, and we'll translate it into a 3D model. At that point, every penetration and every connection point and every shape for your building is pre-cut into those panels. So you end up with essentially a Lego house, or a house that can be constructed very, very quickly just with screws, without any of the other types of labor that goes into cutting openings and joists or whatnot. So a building done well is a building that has an architect, an engineer, and all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing all aligned so that it can be pre-designed into the 3D model. And when that is done, these buildings go up very quickly. The cabin you mentioned, essentially the structural install period was only 10 working days, because you're essentially just taking fabricated panels and screwing them together. Then you have your structural envelope. So it really offers a lot of opportunity. When we're talking about very large buildings, I was just talking to a client yesterday about a 12-story building we're building down in Oakland starting next month. They anticipate that they will be able to put up 6 floors in a week. So that means the entire structure for the building will go up in 2 weeks. And that will be remarkable to see.
That actually is really helpful for post megafire rebuilds too. And many people want sort of the emotional connection that they have to wood, but they think that they can't have it. And so how long did it take for the cabin to be built then? I can see you're in right now, so it's very beautiful. But how long did it take for those walls to go up, the structural frame?
Yeah, the structural frame was really only 10 working days. Obviously, all the other things take quite a while, but so we were still just under a year for overall construction, finishes, appliances, everything else that went into it. But it was still a fairly expedited schedule as far as how quickly it went up.
So I love that. And I love the fact, again, that it's very, very beautiful. So let's talk about the residential piece of it, like the cabin, for example. You made some pretty cool choices when you were constructing this to make it intensely fire resistant, right down to the insulation. Can you talk about the choices that you made?
We consider this to be a real opportunity to highlight fire-safe construction. Also, because our material operates very, very well in a fire. So some of the elements that we designed into this property and into the house, one, we put in a 20,000 gallon fire pond nearby, which we've made accessible to the local community as well, with standoffs for the local fire department. We have a sprinkled perimeter around the entire 3 acres of the property. For the house construction itself, we put a 15-foot rock perimeter around the house with no large shrubberies that are going to be near. The buildup for the walls are essentially from the interior, our 6-inch mass ply panel, which makes up the interior visible but also structural envelope for the building. Then it has a WRB, or weather resistant barrier. Then we have standoffs and a rock wool insulation, which is fire resistant. Then we have 2 different siding types. One is a shisugi-ban, which is a Japanese method of pre-charring wood, which allows a additional fire protection. And then we also have steel cladding on the other portions of the building. So everything across the building envelope is all non-combustible, essentially. But one of the other things that happens in a building like this is that there's no interior attic space or framing. So a lot of times what happens with a fire is that embers can get into your attic space and essentially burn the house from within. So this is fully enclosed. The house is very, very airtight. We handle air movement just with a air exchange from that's mechanical interior, but also just through window venting when we're here. So on a whole, there's no way for an ember to actually enter the house. A couple of the other novel things we did is we put, sprinkler heads up on the flat portions of our roof, so we could potentially add additional fire protection around the property, if we could.
And so interesting. We saw a lot of sprinkler salespeople go into the Palisades and Altadena after the fires, and we said, well, those are great for rural communities, but if you have a shared water system, where you have a suburban, like small lots, 4,000 square foot lots, they're actually not as great, but they're wonderful for rural communities. I also, if you could take a moment, because when you drove past your water, your pond, your water retention pond, I would have never guessed it held that much. Can you talk about the size when you're looking at it? Because otherwise you just don't notice it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the overall dimensions were, but it's somewhere around, let's say, 20 feet by 40 feet. But it's about 12 to 14 feet deep, if I remember correctly. So the depth is what really gets you a lot of that volume that we have there. And like I said, it was we luckily have the assistant fire chief as our neighbor. And so when we were talking about doing this, he asked if there was some additional, benefits that we could do, like add the standoff for the local fire department, because they are water deprived during these events as well. So it's an opportunity for them to access water quickly. So we were happy to do that.
I love that part. The other thing is that unfortunately, too many people who are new to this space think you're sacrificing beauty for being resilient. And I didn't see that at all. I saw so much beauty, and it's so resilient and resistant to fire. When you're talking to new clients, or do you have a lot of residential people coming to you, or is it primarily all commercial?
No, we have a lot of residential people that talk to us as well. I would say maybe unfortunately, but fortunately, just to be able to get in the single family space, is a lot of the buildings that we do or have done in the last few years have been in those truly high end residential, in locations that have, say, restricted building zones. A good example would be Jackson Hole or the Tetons, where the building season is so short and the snow loads and other capacities are so high that having a truly engineered panel like this would work very well. So we've done numerous high-end homes where, cost is not that much of an issue. What I'm really excited about, though, too, is that we are also working with the universities, University of Oregon and Oregon State University, through the Tallwood Design Institute, and also through many other clients and other universities, to help develop cost-effective mass timber single-family housing. Because the next shoe to drop when housing starts to open up again is the lack of potential workers out there and construction workers in order to erect houses. So if we can handle a lot of these elements inside the factory and prefabricate these, so all you need to do is screw it together, then you can end up with what I think is a truly a much higher quality home than what we've had in the last 10, 15 years. That you could sacrifice some of the time it takes to put up these homes, especially in a typical stick framing, and end up with a much more solid structure that could give you a little bit more certainty of being reliable in a fire as well.
I love that part because I'm a fan of the Sears Roebuck model, like a forest square. I think those houses are still standing. They're super beautiful. And that's just one of the models that I happen to be very fond of. But in the recent past, when people were doing the panels that you could put up, one of the issues that we had was that in shipping, they would arrive broken. In Sonoma County, that was a big issue that we had. So it sort of lagged then. But I don't see that as a problem with your type of manufacturing. Would you agree that that's true?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And to your point, I'm amazed that Sears Roebuck was able to solve this issue 100 years ago, but we can't solve it now. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous to me. When we create a project, whether it's a single family home or it's a multi-story building, we specify location of panel on each truckload. So every panel has a number. This is like paint by numbers. You know the location on the truckload. You know exactly where it goes on the building. So yes, you have to have some heavier equipment, a crane or an extended boom forklift, something like that, to put them up, because you're not going to be carrying these panels across your job site. But the efficiency of that labor is extremely improved, and the quality of these panels are so much more than you would see in a typical stick frame or SIP panel as well.
I appreciate that so much. there does. So one of the things too that is a challenge in this space is contractors, when they come in, especially after a mega fire and there's thousands of homes to rebuild, they tend to want to build what they know already. And so they're not always comfortable with anything that they've not built before. What kind of thing would you like to see, or what kind of programs would you like to see to really train the workforce for the future to embrace and understand these types of building? Because we do need to change the way that we're building so that we can do better. And also, we don't have to lose so much in a mega fire. We just don't, or in other perils as well.
Yeah. Number one, people need to have an open mind. And you're right. We see contractors that want to add on additional contingency costs because of an unknown. But we're also seeing projects move away from that, the additional contingency costs now, because it's becoming a little bit more well-known. We have good industry organizations like Woodworks. That's a good proponent towards providing the information that contractors don't have, and they can access that online at woodworks.org. There's also the Wood Innovations Network that provides a pretty good list of all the mass timber projects that are being produced in the United States, so people can start to see exactly what things are produced out there. The other thing I'm very excited about is that we are making very good inroads with all the trade unions that have specific impact on how some of these buildings are done. The ironworkers have been great partners with trying to figure out how we could get into helping out Lahaina and into Hawaii. The Carpenters Union has been really good with trying to figure out how they can train additional of their members to fully understand this types of material. So there's an open-mindedness happening now that I think is very beneficial and hopeful.
Hey guys, happy Saturday in Santa Monica. Can you tell me where we are and what your names are?
Hi, my name's Jasper. This is Anton. We're on Lincoln Boulevard in Santa Monica, California.
What's special about today, Anton?
Today is the official launch of our new business, Monarch Nursery. We're at the end of our first month and we're having a little event later today.
Oh, bubbly. So what does what you're doing have to do with the fires at all? Jasper, were you?
Yeah, so me and my family were in Altadena for 9 years. And obviously, we lost everything in the fire. So we got offered some housing on back on the west side. And we've relocated in El Segundo. And just recently this opportunity came up for this business, and I'm an avid gardener. I have been my whole life. I've been working in commercial agriculture for the last few years. It just seemed like a brilliant fit. I really missed my garden. Obviously, I spent most of my free time there in Altadena, so it's very sad for me not to have that anymore. But now I have thousands of plants I can take care of right here.
So, Anton, were you in the Altadena fire?
I wasn't. I was pretty close though, on the border of El Sereno and South Pasadena, and I had a lot of animals. I was living with a lot of animals at that time, so it was a pretty stressful couple of weeks, and I certainly put 10 or 12 animals in the car a couple of times during the period. And yeah, so it was...
I hope there weren't cows or sheep in your car.
No, I did small lots.
So why do you think greenery, life, why do you think this symbolically and realistically is good for people building back after the fire?
I think in today's world, where there's a lot of pressures and a lot of stress, and obviously with regards to the fires, there was a lot of loss. Growth and green growth tends to bring people happiness. Flowers certainly. And also, for me, one of the biggest things is actually seeing nature feed off growth and things that you planted and things that you put in the garden. And to me, that's one of the most kind of satisfying things about growing plants.
Yeah, and if you look at the neighborhoods now as they are, the ones that have burned down, there's a couple of wild plants that managed to survive with no irrigation, but it's going to be a few years before it gets back to where it was. So, the earlier you can start planting again, the better. Not just for yourself and your happiness, but for nature in general.
Yeah, one of our researchers found out that approximately 14,000 trees were lost in the Palisades.
Yeah.
And up to 75% of Altadena's tree canopy. Urban canopy was lost. It was, as you know, one of the most lush places in California. Yeah. So tell us what symbol remained in your yard, Jasper.
Yeah, so I have a 170-year-old oak tree in my back garden. We named it Bernard. Don't know why, just the name that came out. But he was totally fine. He got some burn on the lower portion, but he was so big. He was totally fine. And initially I was like, I really want to rebuild, because the reason I bought the house was because of Bernard trees. Because he gave us cover from the sun.
Yep.
I was able to create like a mini tropical ecosystem back there with the shade. So I was always in the mindset of rebuilding, but with kids in school and having to move them again and the long expensive building process, I just thought it was too much for my family. So it looks like we're going to stay on the west side and see what happens. See if we can get back into owning a house one day. I don't know how that's going to
Yeah, we'll see for all of us. But Antoine, tell me, you guys are, it feels like serial entrepreneurs. You two are partners in Monarch. What other businesses have you had?
I used to own a distillery in downtown LA. We were there for 6 years. Unfortunately, we couldn't quite recover from the pandemic. Also feel that industry has changed a lot in this city. And also, the next generation is less interested in alcohol. And I think, younger people and the interest in plants is growing further afield every day. And I think people that were potentially not interested in having a few house plants 5 years ago now very much are. And I think that interest, as I say, is reaching further afield.
So you, Jasper, what is your message as an entrepreneur, as someone who lost all your possessions and your family was displaced? Why did you have the courage to start anew, a rebirth?
That would be giving up. And what's the point of giving up? If you have a family and people that you got to take care of, you don't really have a choice. And you've got to keep going. You've got to stay positive. And as I say, you got to keep hustling, especially living in this city. It's hard enough. Possessions are just things, Our family, everyone was fine. Our dog was fine. We lost all our stuff, but you just have to start from scratch and rebuild. Now we have this business, which I wouldn't have had without that. So you got to look at the positives of every bad situation.
And Antoine, what do you say? Why do you think this will make people smile if they come and take time?
I think we can, as I say, offer a large variety that people can't get so centrally. I think. As I say, I think more and more people are interested in plants, and we don't mind whether you're a first-time plant owner or seasoned landscaper. There's something for everyone here, and even if you're not buying, there's lots of beautiful things to look at. And it's just a lovely place to be.
It really is. A little oasis, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, we're gonna send some people your way, so get ready. Okay.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Of course, we've been working in Lahaina for about 2.5 years, and I have to say that especially speaks to all my hopes and dreams for them, because that fire, every fire is so tragic, and that one just had such a high number of casualties. But imagine if you couldn't get out, like maybe you could shelter in place if necessary in a home like this, and then withstand it. There would be damage to your home, but I feel like it could be survivable, and really we want that. Not only could your home be survivable, but the people inside of it. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm just saying that's our hope for them, especially because how to do it there. They also have other perils to consider, everything from a lot of salt water to hurricanes, to high wind events. And I feel like, would it be a correct statement that this technology could actually withstand those issues as well? Or are you working on parts of those?
There's almost not a natural disaster out there that I don't think our panels can help with. For instance, we've been involved in this 10-story shake table testing down at University of California, San Diego. And it was the first building to ever survive the types of testing that I put it through on a seismic table. So they essentially put our panels and other CLT producers through almost 2,000 years of seismic events with names. I mean, essentially, all of the named earthquakes out there, they've really simulated every single one on this building, and it was still standing. And the main benefit that we have as wood is that it's so much lighter than concrete and steel in a multi-story structure. So you can imagine if you have an earthquake and you've got a lot of weight up above on the top of the building, you're going to have a lot of sway and a lot of movement. These panels are stiff, but you can build ductility into the connections, but they're much lighter, so you have a lot less of an impact up on other stories. For tornadoes and hurricanes, we have gone through impact testing for tornado shelters, and the panels perform very, very well for those. We are currently working with the Colorado School of Mines to look at roof uplift, so to create a monolithic roof so that your roof isn't torn off during a tornado or a hurricane. And to your point, for a forest fire or fire, we can create a truly safe spot within a home with thick panels that fires won't be able to burn through, with a much better structural system surrounding it as well. So maybe floods, that could be one that's a little bit tougher, but frankly, if your house stays on the foundation, then you always have a good base to work from.
It's true. In some ways, floods are really tough, but in some ways, they are easier than megafires because there's something left, and you can muck, gut, and blue tarp. That's what they do. And right now in Maui, for example, they had, of course, the megafire in August of 2023, but they just went through the Kona low storm. So they're doing trainings right now on remediation of mold inside of the homes, because of course, it's been just long enough for a lot of mold to grow, because that happened 2 months ago. So I really appreciate all of that. So I would say that the most visible thing that you all have been that you have been involved with, which many people might be familiar with, is the remodel of the Portland Airport. Can you talk about that project, because it's so beautiful?
Yeah, the Portland Airport was just a massive opportunity for us. Of course, it's a lifetime of marketing built into a single project. I really got to hand it to the Port of Portland with leading with their values and their virtues, to say that they wanted this entire structure to be sourced locally with innovative products. So it was a big boon to local producers out there. It's the only building, to my understanding, in Oregon that's actually built to withstand the Cascadia subduction zone event. So what they anticipate to be a 9 magnitude or greater earthquake within the Pacific Northwest. So all else fails, the Portland Airport's going to be a testament to exactly what wood can do in a seismic event. But it was an interesting project, because sometimes it makes you believe in serendipity or providence, because at the end of the day, the Portland Airport wanted to do their product out of locally sourced materials at a time in which we were developing our own new innovative mass timber product. I don't think they would have been able to complete the roof as they had designed it unless our product was available. So those two things aligning at the same time was truly amazing. So what we ended up with was creating the entire 9 acres of roof that the Portland Airport had. And if you haven't seen it, the Portland Airport roof is not a flat roof. It's actually an undulating roof that goes over curved glulam beams produced by Zippo here in Eugene. And it's very counterintuitive to think that you can bend a plywood panel over a roof like that, especially something that's 2 inches or greater thick. But the wonderful engineers on that project, working with ZGF Architecture, were able to design the roof so that every single panel was unique. They were either beveled or they had a curvature to them, so they interlocked like a puzzle piece and were able to bend over the entire roof envelope. So we had something like 2,400 panels on that roof, and I don't think there was a single one that was miscut. So the whole team put together an amazing project there, and we were able to deliver the product that they wanted in order to create it very, very quickly.
It's so beautiful when you're walking through it. You can see all of the curvatures. Like it feels emotionally healthy in there. And I know that sounds odd for an airport, which rarely feels emotionally healthy. I'm in so many of them, but it really was so beautiful that when I was there with my husband, he was like, "Okay, calm down." So I was selfieing it out and doing videos, and there was there's the part that we were in, it looked like the spines almost of a whale or something, or of a ship. And so there was that challenging to figure that out, or is it because you're just so good now with the technology of the laser cuts, or how do you, I mean, I can't imagine what a challenge that is to get all of those right, because it's very, very intricate.
It was truly challenging, and you've got to hand it to a architect like ZGF, because when they saw what we were able to do with the roof diaphragm, they immediately started asking what else we could do. So the majority of the lattice work in the Portland airport is actually solid sawn timber, so traditional timbers that are manufactured, but they wanted to do things with wood that aren't typically done, such as those giant eyelash sweeps that drop down from the skylights. So they continuously pushed us to come up with new solutions in order to achieve that. And I think the effect is amazing. I think a lot of people that go into the airport won't recognize that so much of the material that's in the airport is ours. And on a side note, that the Portland airport was produced in 2021 for us, 2021 and 2022. So the vast majority of the material that went into the Portland airport was salvage material from the Santiam Canyon, at least produced from us. And so we figure about 70 to 80% of the total fiber in the Portland airport was salvaged from the Beachie Creek Fire, and that land was replanted within 2 years afterwards. So I'm very proud of that we were able to do that. And most people don't recognize either that there's a lot of small family landowners around the Santiam Canyon. People with donation land claims, even from the initial time of settling in Oregon, and they lost everything in that fire. And if we weren't able to go in and provide them with revenue for the timber that they lost and able to turn it into such an extraordinary structure like the Portland airport, then they would not be able to replant their own lands or rebuild their own buildings. So I'm just really glad that we had the opportunity to do that.
That gave me goosebumps. I did not know that. That might become one of my favorite stories that I walk all around the country with, is to take something so terrible, but do that circular economy that helped get people home. And for those who don't know, one of the very amazing things about the Santiam Canyon is we really never see a rural community come back and have their last 10 homes, their primary homes, will be rebuilt by June. And that's a 5.5 year, almost 6 year recovery in a rural community. That's just not that common, because rural communities tend to get left behind for attention and for resources. And it's even hard to hit like the threshold for a federally declared disaster. So there's so much to be proud of there, but having that piece of it that could actually put money back into the local economy for people who were fire survivors to get home, I think it's something there's so much to be proud of there. There's including like the hospital model, never mind, your astonishingly wonderful wife, who's just a great leader, but really some really solid leaders there in Santiam Canyon. But I didn't know that part. And I think that just really adds to the success of your community in getting home.
Thank you. And I would agree. I think that having a vibrant timber industry in this canyon provided so many avenues for people to mitigate their loss. In a lot of disaster regions, there's not this type of industry available in order to turn damaged resources into marketable goods. And so there's good family ownership in multiple mills around this area, and they were all able to step in very, very strongly for their local community. And I really appreciated that.
Well, I think there's an sort of outdated idea that you can't have both a strong timber industry and be ecologically responsible. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on today onto the podcast, is because it's a very beautiful product, but also there are other places like here, even in Sonoma County, where we have an abandoned mill that people came to me, they're like, we really want to do like mass timber at this mill, but there's so much resistance because people automatically think that we're now 120 years ago and they're doing old growth redwood trees, and they don't understand there's a whole span of possibility there, and we actually have to lean into what's possible and what's necessary. So I hope people walk away from this understanding that aspect of it.
I would hope that people recognize that wood is the most environmentally and ecologically beneficial material we have to build with as a society across the entire United States. It's renewable, it's recyclable, it's reusable, it's solar powered. At the end of the day, we can take the tree resources and then replant afterwards and have a forest growing up in its place. I'm going to say a word that people look at with fear, which is, clear cut. I mean, at the end of the day, we're limited to 120 acre clear cut in Oregon. What we had from the Labor Day fires was a 300,000 acre clear cut in our backyard that has still not been restored. So we can mimic those natural processes to create a healthier environment that's more consistent with what we saw during the time of the Native Americans when they were so active in managing the forests. We did it back in the 80s and 90s. We can do it again. I mean, we can create this opportunity where our local communities are safer and our rural communities are safer, more prosperous, and more able to withstand these types of disasters.
I so appreciate that. It's a reimagining of what's possible, but I also like the part of it where we walk into so many communities that are the result of a collapsed timber economy that have no economy. There's no economy there unless it is a place of recreation. Recreation isn't often it's just not enough to sustain an entire economy. And I'm thinking of like Plumas County, for example, which is very beautiful, but absolutely ravaged by the Dixie Fire. And they have the materials for everything that you think. And they have Sierra Institute doing some of this, but they're not at scale. And there has to be an investment in scale, an investment in ideas. And one of the things I was so excited about is not only are you at scale, but you're down the road in scale. So it's not like you're at scale for 1 year. I like the fact that you started this even 2 years before your fires, 2.5 years or however long it was. So I really thank you. I want to finish with this question. What gives you hope?
I think what gives me the most hope is I feel that people are starting to recognize that we have neglected our natural resources for the last 30 years. And we have essentially stopped managing our forests here on the West Coast in order to import our products from all over the world, whether it's from Brazil, from Russia. China is the largest plywood producer in the world. Canada, Europe. We have the natural resources here. We have the opportunity to manage those resources for all the benefits: community, rural communities, resilient forests, ecology, all of those. If we take the mindset that we need to be the gardeners of our forest gardens and that we need to take care of these things and they shouldn't be squandered and they shouldn't be neglected. And I think we're starting to recognize that these things must be closer to our hearts as opposed to further away. And we need to know where our materials come from as opposed to just turning a blind eye and just importing cheap imports just to do it. I mean, we have a responsibility to these forests, and part of that responsibility is that we keep them clean and we keep them safe, and we also create the products of the future out of this. So I think that mindset is changing, and that's what gives me the most hope, is that we are here and we are ready to make cost-effective, innovative wood products for the marketplace if we can just access the timber and create a more resilient forest. And we're ready for it. As soon as society is ready, we're ready to grow and start producing more.
And you're going to do it. Because I also, I think more and more we have to recognize that we have to focus less on the politics of it and more on what actually works and what's possible. And I think that your vision and what you've carried out as a leader in Freres has been engineered wood products. I'm getting that right now, is something that gives me hope. And I really appreciate everything you've done. And I appreciate you hosting us last week. And thank you so much for being on the How to Disaster podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and wonderful conversation.